Looking for a guaranteed way to create content that resonates with your audience? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients and let them choose the topic of the interview. Because if your ideal clients care about the topic, there's a good chance the rest of your audience will care about it too. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2b Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Étienne Garbugli. He is the co-founder over at Highlights and author of the book Lean B2B. Étienne, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing very good. Yourself?
I am doing fantastic. It's Friday afternoon. It's sunny out here in Colorado at the time of that we're recording this, so I can't complain at all. We're going to be talking about customer discovery, both in the early stages of startup and further along in your growth. But before we jump into the topic that you're going to be sharing on today, I would love for you to share with listeners a little bit about your background and what you and the team at Highlights are up to these days.
So to start with, I'm a user research expert. So I used to work specifically in UX. And then I also have the entrepreneurial bug. So I've been starting businesses, and which led to me going all in into customer development. So in 2011, I started a business in B2B. I was trying to apply the lean startup in a B2B context, and that was very, very difficult. So we had a lot of issues trying to validate the product with companies the way you would do in B2C, which led to a lot of issues that ended up killing our company because it took way too long for us to validate the product, and we had a lot of difficulties understanding the sales process. Now that fits in with the lean startup process, which actually made me want to solve this problem. So I took a step back. I spoke to hundreds of B2B entrepreneurs to figure out how to build a process that would work specifically for B2B. And this is actually what I published with the book Lean B2B. And since then, I've been involved in a bunch of different organizations, helping them understand their customers, understand how to bring products to market, and how to maximize the output for their products.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. So we're going to be talking about some specifics when it comes to customer discovery and really understanding your ICP, especially in the early days as you're doing, market research and trying to determine that product market fit. But let's have you kick things off. And you alluded to it there a little bit in your own story, but why should marketers and early stage startups, or really anybody in the B2B space, really care about customer discovery?
That's a great question. So over the years, there's been more and more businesses coming up in the B2B space. It's getting more and more crowded. I know it because of my Lean B2B effort and everything else I do. You see more companies positioned on different types of products. So there's more noise, but there's also more opportunities than before. So more organizations are buying software, are buying different products. There's different departments in the organizations that are using software that were not using software before. So it's harder to find a good positioning and good way to bring a product to market. So it's way, way more important to be able to understand how to position your product, how to solve a key problem for your market, and how to be able to build the right thing to be able to grow your business. So this is a process. Customer discovery is a process that allows you. It's a little bit like if you're mining for gold. So it allows you to be able to find the best opportunity that for your business to be able to grow from there. So there's a bunch of different ways to do customer discovery, and that's the process I'm going to be talking about within this discussion.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to argue with you that, especially in the B2B space, especially in the SaaS space, where a lot of our listeners are, that there's any debate that it's becoming more crowded. So something that can set you out on the right path to find the right customers and the right niche that you're going to carve out for yourself is very important. So let's get into this framework and some of the tactics that you want to unpack today on how to do this. So let's start with how to identify who to reach out to. What do you suggest starting with here in this first step?
So when whether you're a big organization looking to expand your product line or a smaller organization, either way, you're going to need a starting hypothesis. So who are you targeting first? So there's a lot of problems with B2B startups stem from what point of departure they have. So whether they start with a solution or they start with a problem or they start with a market. So different ways to kickstart your business. And if you start with a solution, for example, you will need to find which people will consume this product. If you start with the problem, you will need to know who has that problem specifically. So the best way to start is with the hypothesis around the market. So what are the people you're trying to target? What you want to find out is what are their pains? How do they evaluate solution? What kind of budget they have? Because your goal is to find the biggest opportunity, the best opportunity for your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's some tactical advice for folks who understand this first step now, Étienne, and want to take that next step of getting customer interviews and actually, reaching out and engaging these folks? What are some of the ways that you found to be most effective?
Yes. So the best way is to start with the hypothesis around your early adopters. So you're creating a bit of an ideal customer profile where you start with an hypothesis of where you could find these people. So good ways to do this effectively and quickly is to look for pools of users, pools of customers. So those could be conferences, directories, communities, other analogies. If you think that the product you want to put in place will target the same audience as another product, those will be hypotheses. So once you know where to find these potential early adopters, you want to start to define what role within these organizations might be the person that would buy your product. So the core customer you're looking for in these organizations. So there's a lot of ways to engage with these people, but what I found is the most effective in terms of strategy is cold email, because it allows you to really, really precisely target the right people for your right hypothesis. So for example, if you're going after companies that are internationalizing their product, but you're looking for the person responsible specifically for that, you might want to target the growth directors in these organizations, and you could do that at scale with cold email to be able to refine your messaging and test the way to engage these organizations.
So it sounds like you're also laying the groundwork for how you're going to do your outbound sales development at the same time, because you're A/B testing your messaging as you cold email these folks that you think fit your ideal customer profile, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's two core variables there. So what's your basic hypothesis for the pain point that you're solving, the problem that you're solving, and the target? So who cares about this specific problem? So these two variables are dynamic. So you want to find the right match. And a great way to do that is to start with medium where you have a benchmark. So you can actually compare the performance of your cold emailing campaigns depending on the messaging that you have. So this, in the last few years, I've done thousands of different customer discovery interviews. And I found that there's a lot of things that these actual reach out can tell you just in terms of your messaging and reaching the right people within these organizations.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the things you recommend in that messaging? How often you're hitting people? Do you frame it as, we want your input on a new product, or more almost just like you would a cold sales email? Do you have this problem? We think we can solve it. Any suggestions there on maybe those two things that kind of bubble to mind on ways you could approach the messaging?
Yeah, I found that the broader the problem definition in the email, the wider appeal it will have with the audience. So there's going to be more curiosity. People are going to be more likely to want to engage. And then you can learn more about the broader set of problems that they have in the organization. If you're going with something more specific, for example, you're solving like a really, really key problem in the business, the reaction of people will be like, we don't have that problem, or I don't have that problem, or I don't frame that problem that way, so I'm not even going to answer. So if the problem is you're hitting a top problem for the organization, but they don't necessarily know what your solution is, they're going to be curious to understand how they can help and what kind of value your solution could provide.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense as you're talking about, I don't frame the problem that way, because you're still figuring it out and you're very early. You're not even educating the market yet. You're trying to learn from the market so that you can educate them. So if you go a little bit broader, you can start to see what is the niche, what themes and what common phrases and common themes come up in the responses that you get, and then go niche from there. So that makes sense to me. Obviously, you've done this a lot more than I have, Étienne, but that reasoning seems to make sense as we're talking through it. So let's talk about the next step for listeners who maybe are envisioning the next step of, okay, we've got these customer interviews booked, or people that are already in this process on actually doing the customer discovery effectively. What tips and strategies do you have here for executing the next step of the process once you get people engaged?
Yeah. So the first question is, are you going to do these interviews face-to-face or via the phone or under medium? This will give you different levels of inputs. If you are able to meet people face-to-face, you will be able to better establish a relationship and probably be able to better understand if they're not telling you exactly the truth for this. Because that's a key issue within the customer discovery process, is that people will withhold information, or they will not tell you exactly the right information, because people will try to be mindful of your ego. So if they feel that your ego is on the line and during these customer discovery interviews, some people will try to avoid or frame things in a certain way that can mislead your efforts in terms of understanding the dynamics and the problems in the organization. So the customer discovery process is all about understanding the why and the narrative. So you want to start with a blank slate where you don't have a preconceived notion of what will be a good solution. Mm-hmm. As your idea has to be guilty from the start, because you want to focus on what people actually do, what they actually pay for, what they actually are, the way they interact within the organization. So you have to build the trust for people to want to engage and open up and share the real stories within their organization.
Yeah. Can you give us any examples of where you've seen people, not frame the questions or do the customer discovery effectively that really led to ineffective answers or biased answers, those sorts of things, whether it's trying to protect your pride or those sorts of things? I imagine you've done this enough. You've seen it done well and done not so well. Can you give us some examples and maybe some tactics that worked well and didn't work well there?
Yeah, absolutely. So with my previous startup called iReverse, we started doing interviews, and I was learning it at that point. One thing that kept coming up, because we were working in a space that was really new and really exciting at that point in HR, which was employee engagement. So we were trying to build a platform to monitor employee engagement, and it was a lot of the people we were speaking with in HR felt that this was super interesting. So the word that kept coming up was, "This is interesting. This is great." So they were propping up our ego. So we felt like this was going to be a really big opportunity. This was going to work, but we didn't actually try to understand how they act on software typically. So we didn't understand that these people didn't have budget. They didn't have ways to buy new technology. They didn't actually have the need. They just felt that because a lot of people in HR were talking about employee engagement, this was actually adding a lot of information that they needed. This was interesting for them, but it was not going to lead to something that was sustainable. So people were encouraging us, they were pushing us in that direction, but they did not have the potential to become customers for our software. So there's a lot of different variations in this where the way to kind of flip that around to really make it, you're not talking about your idea at all. So you don't even explain what you're trying to do. You don't approach it in a way where you're trying to establish the next step. Other ways to kind of overcome the lies that people might be telling you without wanting to tell you the lies necessarily is getting people to do something else at the same time. So there's an entrepreneur in Canada that was talking about how you give them a prototype and then you ask them questions at the same time, even though the prototype has nothing to do with what you're putting in place. Just gets them out of their bubble where they're trying to frame things a certain way. And you want to as well follow the emotions, because that's the parts that are going to be the truest in your validation. So you want to focus on actions. You want to focus on the things that are not the way people position themselves. They're not the image that they're trying to show in terms of the way they are in the organization. You want to focus on things that they've done, things they are actually doing, and you don't want to do any projection in the future.
Yeah, I've heard that term before, whether it's in interviews like this or sales conversations, when someone says, that's interesting, that oftentimes is like, oh, that sounds like a compliment, but it's really not, because it's like, that's enough to interest me, but not to take action. And then at the end of the day, you're not really achieving much at that point, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it probably stems from the idea that a lot of people doing customer discovery think it's a discussion when it's really an information gathering process. So you're there to try to get information around the different hypotheses and the different elements of your model that you're trying to validate, not trying to just come out of there with a positive discussion with the person.
Right. Yeah. Positivity is not the point here, folks. I think almost addressing that very upfront and just laying the groundwork that we're looking for very candid feedback. This is not about us. We're trying to figure out about, what you need. So if you just tell us that, hey, we have a great idea, and like you said, making it less about your idea so that there's less opportunity for them to do that, I think is really good advice. So let's kind of round it out here, Étienne, with you've found the right people, you've reached out to them, you've done some effective interviews in the style that works best for you with some of these tactics here. Now you come to analyzing the results and identifying what's come out of that. What is really the customer need? What do you have to recommend to folks in this final stage of the process?
So the first thing first is to understand if your data that you gathered is valid. So there's none of these false ideas of what matters. There's nothing that is misleading in terms of the data that you're getting. You want to make sure that there's enough people as well in the segment that you're hoping to build things towards, because you don't want to build for a single customer. So you don't want to build for one organization. So if one organization told you that this problem is super important, we need a solution for this, you definitely want to take a step back and try to find other organizations that have a similar pain point, because that's the direct path to consulting, where you build something for this specific organization and then you figure out that their needs were so specific that you invested a lot of time and money and effort in building a solution that has a market of one. So you want to make sure that your segmentation is well defined, and you want to refine it as you move forward. So you want to make sure that there's several different businesses that have similar patterns that you can target in terms of building a product or building a solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
The elements there that you want to focus on are the outcomes, the pains, and the budget. So you want to make sure that the organization, the person that you're trying to sell to, and the buyer group within the organizations have budget. So they're able to afford a solution, or they actually these give you a budget range that you can use to modelize your business moving forward. You want to know that there is actual pain. So pain is the best predictor of future action, so that they're actually going to be wanting to engage and solve this pain soon. And you also want to understand the outcome, which gives you an idea of how they're going to evaluate this solution. Because as we talked about before, so there is more and more competition. So the way you differentiate from their existing solution, which could be software, could be consulting, could be an Excel spreadsheet, you want to make sure that what you're putting in place is significantly better. So they're actually going to switch over to your solution and adopt the new product or the new solution you're putting in place.
So you mentioned 4 things that we want to look for is that, we want to look for the feedback that's not anecdotal. It's wider across, a decent set so that there is enough of a total addressable market. We want to find, do folks within that set have budget? 3rd, do they have enough pain? And 4, what's going to be the potential ROI in the pain and the solution? Because it's not just product problem fit. There are a lot of great ideas to solve problems, but they're not cost effective, or they're not going to be, analyzed in be perceived with positive ROI for the people that they could solve them for. That's why there's not a better mousetrap these days, right? So I think having those 4 criteria of a big enough market, people with budget, enough pain, and an outcome that can achieve positive ROI for people within that market is a great framework for people to think through as they analyze the results of their discovery as they're searching out product market fit. Étienne, I love the tactical stuff that you've been sharing with listeners today. If anybody would like to learn more from the resources you have out there or follow up with you with questions on this topic, what's the best way for them to find any of those resources or reach out to you?
So on my website, so leanb2bbook.com, they can actually download a first template to be able to do these initial customer discovery interviews. I'm also putting together a customer discovery course that they're going to be able to take on if they're interested in learning about that. There's also different emails as well to help with the training on that side. If they also want to check out my business at gethighlights.co, that's also interesting. There's a lot of different avenues that I put in place, lots of different content on my blog as well if they want to get started with customer discovery and try to map out and understand the opportunities within businesses.
I love it. Étienne, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. This has been a great conversation, man.
Thank you. That's really appreciated.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2b Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.